What poverty measure introduced by a Labour government do you admire? Mention just one, perhaps, that you particularly think they did well.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people talk about that great Attlee government, that great reforming government after the war, and quite rightly they look at the building of the NHS and elsewhere. But actually, for me, the really big thing was the National Assistance Act, which first codified this idea that we look after those who are unable to pay into the system. So it was specifically designed for people who weren't involved in the national insurance. So it was for single mothers, it was for people with physical disabilities, it was for people with homeless, and it also empowered local authorities, and it charged them with making sure that there was accommodation for people who didn't have it. It made sure that there was that social safety net in our communities, in every community, and it charged at a community level to do it. And it was the biggest reform since the Poor Laws from Elizabeth I. And I think that was probably one of the biggest single acts that the Labour Party did in that amazing reforming post-war government that they had, that made a huge difference to the most vulnerable in our society.
Sajid?
I would pick the emphasis they put on international aid. Actually, I think they did a lot more than any previous government in terms of promoting international aid. They probably necessarily didn't do it the right way. We've built on that, we've improved it a lot, but I think they were absolutely right to emphasize, as we have done, that if you are one of the richest countries in the world, then you have a moral duty to help the poorest in the world.
Why don't Tories talk very much about the 0.7% aid achievement? Because it was one of the achievements of the last government. And is it slightly buried? Are we slightly embarrassed by it?
Well, let's be not every Tory agrees with that emphasis, and that's probably part of the answer. But I think that actually we are increasingly seeing more and more Tories engage with that agenda. Maybe because most recently, if you look at the migrant crisis, we're able to show, I think, much more clearly the link between soft power and hard power, and I think that's a good way to demonstrate what a real difference to us at home international aid can make as well.
Okay. Michael Gove.
Academy schools.
That's a home match.
Yes, I'm afraid so. But I think that Tony Blair and Andrew Adonis understood that the comprehensive ideal could only work if you did something that people in the Labour Party had never been prepared to do, which was to insist on academic rigour and to avoid making excuses for poor performance in the public sector. And the way in which academy schools, I think, have reinvigorated the comprehensive ideal has meant that we now have a growing number of schools, and they were responsible for the first, which serve their community, which are socially comprehensive, which have high ambitions for their children. I could bore everyone by running through the schools which have been so successful, but some created by Labour, like Mossbawn Community Academy, now send more children to Oxford and Cambridge. That's not the only measure of success, but it's a striking one, than many independent schools. And then there are schools that have been created under the coalition government, which are now outperforming independent schools to the extent that overall our best state schools, as the Daily Telegraph reported earlier this year, now outperform our best independent schools. And that's a victory for comprehensive schooling, not of a kind that Tony Crosland or Shirley Williams would have envisaged, but of a kind that Tony Blair and Andrew Adonis kicked off, and then we've taken forward.
And you wouldn't, by any chance, be mentioning this as a Labour achievement because the current Labour leadership is turning its back on this policy? That wouldn't have entered your head.
I'd be quite simple, the minimum wage. I actually think, notwithstanding the mess of tax credits, which then ended up depressing it, I do think the whole concept that a job worth doing is worth being paid for it. And I think if people are paid a decent salary, I think the companies will invest in them. I know there are economic purists who will disagree with me completely, I know. I'm looking at the back about this. But I just think the mess was with tax credits, which is a kind of depressing process and kept people on very low income. So I think all in all, I think companies by and large anyway will want to raise their salaries, but I think that was a move in the right direction.